So I'll get ready here to hand this to Jeff Callaway, because Jeff's been involved in politics at a number of levels. He was with Canaccord Capital in Calgary for some years. And he's also, though, done a lot of work over the years on proposing and promoting the possible pipeline to Churchill to get product to new markets. And as I said, it's an underrated concept. And things we've got to do is start thinking outside of the box. We can keep them guessing, hey, you stop that, but we're going this way and we're going to go that way because darn it, we're not giving up. We'll move that oil by blimp if we have to. But I think the option to Churchill is a little more rational than blimps for now. So with that said, I will hand this off to Jeff, and he will tell us all about this new potential way to get our products to market.
Yeah, well, thanks, Corey. I just want to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Hope so. But I've got a presentation I'll be sharing on my screen here shortly. You're not here to see my face, but hopefully you'll find the slides much more interesting. I'd say yes, I was involved in politics for sort of 10 years, and that involves dealing with the challenges that we have as a society and a community and as an economy. And one of the things that popped up on my radar quite strongly was obviously we were having challenges with getting our various pipelines approved, getting our resources to market. Be it you're a farmer or an oil producer, it was always a challenge. But the fact is we need to look at other options outside of the box. So I'm just going to share my screen and bring up my presentation here. It should load in a second. Just do the full screen here, give it a second. And here we go. So picking up on what Corey had mentioned, Churchill, thinking outside the box. I entitled this Thinking Outside the Bay. Obviously, Hudson Bay, it sits in the middle of the country. It's off the coast of Manitoba. Not a lot of people think about it or know about it. Everyone sort of skips over and thinks just about Eastern Canada and getting our resources through either Energy East or other pipelines. This is a picture of the Churchill port itself. I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but you've got the grain terminal right here. The whole port was finished in 1929. You've got the wharf along here. It could use a bit of repair, but it is sufficient to bring in a couple of big ships of the Handymax size. The next slide shows a little bit of a wider picture. This is at a low tide, actually. But there is the port. Now, what people also don't know is on the right-hand side, to orientate yourself, there's the Hudson Bay, Manitoba right there. And right about there, we're just above where the O would be in Manitoba, if you can't see my cursor, is where Churchill is. And just to the southeast of that is above the A is where Port Nelson is. So starting with Port Nelson, that was actually the original port that was supposed to be developed for exports of Western Canadian crops, grains, and things of that nature from the Hudson Bay up and over to other markets, be it Europe or down in the States or Eastern Canada. To that extent, the government of Canada in 1912 actually authorized its development, and they were going to build onshore to start with, but this is a major industrial river that is fairly fast flowing, has a lot of volume, has a lot of silt at that time that flowed down the river. So because it's a fairly shallow delta, they couldn't build it onshore. So they built this 17-span train bridge. And again, bear in mind, this is the construction time of 1912 to 1918 during World War I. But they built this 17-span train bridge, which is still there today, but in disrepair, as well as the artificial island you can see in the picture where ships were planned to pull into and offload from. If you can just barely make out on the sort of the bottom right corner of the island, there's actually an old dredge that's been shipwrecked on that island that was used to help dredge out the channel for ships to come in and out. There was actually a 1,000-person man camp just onshore and at the end of that train bridge that was there. There's still a ruins of a few buildings, but right now there's absolutely no one that lives around there in the entire region. If you were to go out into the ocean and kind of go around a bend, you would come to what I could probably call the lonely Maytag repairman of the Parks Canada service, who looks after York Factory, which of course is the old trading forts of the Voyageur and Hudson Bay Company of that time frame. So a little wider picture on Churchill there. You've got the marine tank farm, which is in need of some repair. And the rail line that comes into the port and the town, it's roughly about 900 people or so, is just off to the left of the port. There is no road access to Churchill. It's only rail access. And bear in mind that the 300 kilometers roughly of the last section going into Churchill goes over fairly soft ground. So that's challenging, and a spring flood caused that closure of the railway in 2017. The owner of the time, Omnitracks, just was hoping for and asking for some government support, didn't receive it, although they had received support previously in prior years to operating it. And so they put it up for sale, and they didn't fix it. And the town was stranded, and because Churchill is only able to be serviced on a seasonal basis, sort of from late June to the end of November. When that closure happened in May of 2017, there wasn't enough time to mobilize very much in terms of supply to have Churchill supplied over the winter. So they actually ended up having to fly in a lot of supplies to keep the town going. They did get in some propane and that which was all shipped in from Montreal. And as that rail came apart, a lot of the supplies, which had previously been sourced through Churchill and serviced communities around Nunavut and the rest of the Hudson Bay, then all started to become serviced from Montreal and shipped in from Montreal. A little bit of background on northern Manitoba, just so you can get a bit of an idea of an understanding of what's going on. It's primarily a resource-based economy. There's lots of mining in the Thompson Nickel Belt around the city of Thompson, which is kind of in the middle of northern Manitoba up here. But a lot of those mines have been mined out, and the production has been declining and shutting those smelters, and that's obviously contributed to a lot of job loss as well. There's lots of forestry up there, which is also highly cyclical business, a little stronger right now, but up and down. And significantly, there's a lot of hydro development along the Nelson River, at the mouth of which is where that Port Nelson is. And you can see at if you go straight north of that, that's where Churchill is. That's the other river that comes out. There's Manitoba Hydro actually has partially developed dams there now, so it's stranded capital. They've got lots of excess hydro capacity. So one of the things to consider in bringing our strengths as provinces together and the attributes is potentially for Manitoba Hydro to contribute towards a utility corridor by selling the hydropower from their massive dams on the Nelson River to Saskatchewan and Alberta for good, clean, green power. So that's one of the opportunities for Manitoba. And the other way, of course, could be the shipment of oil or even LNG potentially out through the Hudson Bay. It seems like a good symbiotic relationship. Would create a lot of jobs, a lot of construction jobs in Manitoba, and especially given that one of the most recent hydro dam developments at Kiasp is now actually pretty much finished, and they're selling the camp. You can go to their website and they have the camp listed. One of the largest pieces of development that has occurred in the last handful of years just was announced this past week, and that's where One North, which was the group that bought the railway, the port, the marine tank farm, and importantly, the Port Authority at Churchill, they actually partnered with Fairfax and AGT, and they were funded by the federal government to the tune of about $125 million. I believe the purchase price from Omnitracks is probably around $20 million. That's my belief of what that was, given the information I have. But So the rest was really to go towards funding repairs and maintenance on the rail line and the port facility. And they did get that rail line back up and running towards the end of 2018 and have contributed towards fixing up the rail line, although not in a substantive manner, I would say, that would allow it to really operate on an optimized basis. I'll get to that in a minute. But that news I was referencing earlier this week was One North has now taken over full ownership of, the First Nations communities, as well as the town of Churchill, that were 50-50 partners in One North, have now taken over 100% ownership, and Fairfax and AGT have relinquished their ownership position in One North. Although AGT is providing some transition management services, as well as committing to still supplying some grain volumes to be shipped out through the Hudson Bay. To their credit, one of the interesting things of AGT, which is a tremendous Saskatchewan success story, they gather and ship products like lentils and peas, and they ship them to the global economy, into Europe and China and India and elsewhere in the world. And they were using the Port of Churchill to do that. And that's interesting because when you think of the shipping season for Churchill, without ice strengthened tankers, you've got a season from kind of the end of June until end of November. And the growing season for lentils and peas is a little bit shorter, so you've got time to get those crops off the field, shipped up to Churchill, onto a ship and out before they effectively becomes too ice covered or to have just regular ships ship out, frankly. So, however, there's only been about 233,000 tons of grain that have been shipped out in the past 2 years by the One North group. There's been 6 ships for resupply for northern communities, which is good. But the fact is, the port was effectively kept viable over the past few decades by the Canadian Wheat Board, which ended up shipping out roughly about 500,000 tons a year of grain from the port, and that kept the whole rail line and the port financially viable. I would say supplemented by some via rail transportation. And as my last bullet point shows there's roughly about 120 trains a year that go through there. That's roughly what my estimate is, because via rail goes in there into Churchill about twice a week. Bring some cargo with it too to supply the folks in the town and the port itself, but it's mostly just passenger and a bit of local cargo freights. There really needs to be, to maintain the economic viability and the maintenance costs on the railway, which are substantial, there needs to be at least 500,000 tons of grain a year. Never mind, and other products would be welcome as well. So if it was nickel or if it was gold or whatever the case may be, and oil is an obvious candidate to support the viability of this whole rail system. So the next slide here. So the railway to the Hudson Bay. So as I note here, One North, which is the community of First Nations and communities, and Fairfax bought that railway in about 2018, roughly for $120 million is what they received in funding from the federal government. The federal government also contributed to another approximate $41.7 million in funding over a 10-year period for maintenance expenditures to keep the rail line operational. You can see the kind of red oval with a green line in the center. That's basically the rail line that goes from Gillam up to Churchill. It kind of goes over some soft ground there, and that's where the flood happened that closed it, and that's where most of the maintenance does need to be put to maintain the viability of the railway itself. So that's always an operational challenge. One of the things that you don't really appreciate is as we see the trains run across the prairies, and you've got 400 car trains that are of all kinds of commodities. when you start in the very lower left corner, where the green line starts at the paw in Manitoba, and if you were to take a passenger train from there all the way up to Churchill, that's about a 20-hour voyage. In fact, it's probably even longer than that, because the train in that last 300 kilometers roughly can only go 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. If you had an oil laden train there of just oil crude tanker cars, that train would only need to be, or could only be, about 80 to 100 cars long. And so you're limited in the volumes that you can run through there. Part of the reason for that is, with that very soft ground, is when you think of, for example, if you're out in the woods and you're walking across some moss and you press down on and you step on some moss, it sinks, and then as you step off, it kind of rebounds a bit. It's the same thing with the rail line there, where as you roll those heavy volumes over the rail line, by the time you get to the end, you're starting to almost get a bit of a wave action going on. So that's why the train has to go so slow and can't have these very long trains like we see that run across the prairies, because there'd just be too much whipsaw action at the end, and that would be unsafe. Again, no road to Churchill, so there's only the rail line to get up there. So as noted here, 100 cars at most, which is about 60,000 barrels. Call it about 600 barrels per tank car, maybe 700 in some cases. There is that tank farm at Churchill, but it's only about 50,000 barrels. It's held a variety of products over the years. It does need some work to be improved upon to extend its working life, because I know in recent years there's even been talk of demising it and taking it down. So that would be a sad loss to if that tank farm gets lost. The port itself can take Handymax tankers. The port is a draft of about, that's kind of the depth of a ship's hull, so of about 10 meters. So it can pull up literally to the port and fill right from the port. However, one of the innovative ideas is to actually run a terminal offshore. So you just build basically a hose, a little short pipeline from onshore to offshore, and then you can load a tanker. And then you've got no limit to the size of the tanker you can have. So you can have a very large crude carrier called a VLCC that could have 1 or 2 million barrels, and it could haul out through the Hudson Bay. This is a map of rail lines in Western Canada, and I've got 2 red dots on there. So the top red star is Hardisty, and that's where CP has their line run through and run from, and there's a crude by rail terminal there where crude oil is shipped by rail out of Hardisty. And interestingly, as we're all thinking about Keystone XL right now and how to, say, salvage value from that investment by the Alberta provincial government, one of the interesting notes is that second, the lower red star is actually at the town of Oyen, which has a CN line that runs to it. There's actually frac sand that gets delivered in there now, and the Keystone pipeline actually runs right by Oyen, and it runs north, and it's supposed to connect to Hardisty. There's a short section that just needs to be completed and connected in there. So if anyone's watching, I urge our provincial government to finish that completion, because it has 2 benefits. The one is, on a less important benefit, is it could operate as storage for oil. And then the second benefit, of course, is you could establish a second crude by rail loading terminal at the town of Oyen. And then you've got some competitive tension going between the CP line and the CN line. And obviously the CN line does connect into the Hudson Bay Railway system, and you could run railway just on the same network, because there's a kind of a co-marketing working relationship between CN and the Hudson Bay Railway. In fact, the Hudson Bay Railway was originally a CN line before they sold it off. But that would easily be able to connect on the logistics, shipping oil from Alberta right up to the Hudson Bay. Interestingly, there's another group called Mistanan, which is proposing to actually use the rail bed that is already there, was built back in the mid 1910s, that goes from Gillam all the way out to Port Nelson. And all it means is to basically lay the tracks on that. Of course, there'll be some remedial work as time has gone by here over the past decades, but you could lay a short rail track there. It's about 120 kilometers. And then you could export crude oil using an offshore loading terminal and then ship out to global markets. I would say, as we're talking about pipelines as well, one of the other options is, and I don't have a slide on this, but Enbridge's main lines do run through the bottom left corner of the province of Manitoba, and at a place called Cromer, Cromer, you could build a pipeline that extends from there up the western side of Manitoba and then effectively following the rail line that goes out to the Hudson Bay. And that would be a great pipeline option. And of course, the Enbridge main line has about 3 million barrels a day of shipping capacity. So you could actually run out, if you wanted to get very aggressive with a multi-billion-dollar pipeline project, that would be another way to get out through the Hudson Bay. So one of the questions is, okay, so if you don't have a ship that comes right up to your port and actually you're loading oil from your wharf onto your ship, how do you actually do it then? Well, the Irving refinery, which consumes about 300,000 barrels a day in New Brunswick, they actually have ships that come in from international markets, wherever it's come in. It's all priced on Brent. And they pull up to this little yellow buoy right here that actually has a hose attached to it. And then it's a pipeline that runs on the ocean floor, like the Bay of Fundy floor here, and then connects into the terminal. And so there's no need for these massive ships to get tight close to shore. So, there's less risk in doing that. They can just moor up offshore to this offshore loading terminal, hook up, deliver it on shore. And then, of course, you can have much larger ships shipping. You're not restricted to smaller size. So in terms of Port Nelson as an example, and this would be true for Churchill, and this is an actual map of the port of, or the mouth of the Nelson River. So you would start onshore, and that's approximately where the old development of Port Nelson was. You run a little offshore pipeline to the Red Star, and you could have one of these little yellow buoys that would be or something more substantial. I've got pictures on that. But you could bring the ships in, hook up to that, and then ship off to the refineries, be it Come By Chance in Newfoundland, or Irving in New Brunswick, or the Philadelphia regional refineries, or importantly to Rotterdam. But obviously this rail line to Alberta could just tie in right there. They unload, and then for storage, if you wanted to be creative, you could also just unload onto a holding ship, like a very large crude carrier again, and that could transload onto the ships that will go on. And that would be an easy, simple way and low-cost way to create your terminal storage. Now, so what are the costs? What are we dealing with here? So Brent yesterday was at US $69 a barrel. WTI was 65, almost 66. There's, roughly a $3.60 value. I mean, pricing in North America really for WTI, short for West Texas Intermediate, has been much lower than Brent. Brent is the benchmark price for the Atlantic basin, so it's obviously more expensive to the buyer, to the refinery, to the consumer. Obviously, in Western Canada, we want to maximize the price we receive for oil, so we would prefer to receive that Brent price. Well, shipping out through the Hudson Bay is a way to receive that higher price. However, it hasn't stopped, our innovative Canadian companies from looking at all options here. And Cenovus, to that effect, actually has shipped oil starting here in Alberta, probably right out of Fort McMurray, really, all down through Edmonton, tying into either delivering via the Trans Mountain pipeline or by rail to Vancouver, from Vancouver all down the US West Coast, all around Mexico, probably didn't stop at Acapulco or anything, but went through the Panama Canal, all the way up through the Caribbean, and then all the way up to St. John and delivered at St. John. That blue line on the map also shows the Energy East pipeline, which unfortunately didn't get built. But if we were to just do a short little rail trip to Manitoba, offload, pop around Quebec, and boom, we could be selling into St. John in fairly quick manner. Or to Come By Chance, which is on Newfoundland. Come By Chance is 115,000 barrels a day. That refinery is actually quote unquote warm idled right now because the owners, which are Silver Peak, can't operate it economically, they believe. Of course, they pay Brent prices, and they have had a couple of suitors talk to them, including Irving, but Irving walked away. Another group called Origin made an offer, but Silver Peak didn't accept that. That refinery to the Newfoundland economy is quite substantial. It has about 500 employees that work there, and it has contributed up to 5% of the Newfoundland economy at various points in time. So it's important for that refinery to keep operating. Obviously, if it was able to access slightly cheaper Western Canadian crude for that refinery, it would give it a good chance to remain viable and stay open to the benefit of Newfoundlanders. So obviously, Irving Refinery, they pay Brent prices. They're obviously interested in lower Western Canadian crude prices if they were able to get it. And then, of course, my last note is Rotterdam, which is in the Netherlands, and they've got about 2 million barrels a day of crude demand there amongst various refineries and the petrochemical complexes that is big there too. Most of that is secured from Russia and the Middle East, but as well as the North Sea. But the North Sea has been in decline for several, well, decades really now. So their source of supply is Russia and the Middle East, which is obviously more potentially volatile in the security of supply. So this would be a way for Rotterdam to secure an alternate source of supply. Now, okay, so what does all this cost? I mean, yeah, nice theory and that, but what does this cost? Well, it's about $10 by rail, and that's probably high because you're not going over congested railways to get to Port Nelson or Churchill. I've got a pretty good idea on that. I've seen a lot of the numbers behind that. And $10 a barrel is on the high side. Now, you want some other metrics? Well, to get from the Bakken to basically Seattle, you're talking $9.75, or from Fort McMurray down to Vancouver, you're talking $9.38 a barrel. It's about the same distance roughly from Fort Mac to Vancouver as it is from Fort Mac up to Port Nelson. So, and then how much does it cost by tanker? About $3 a barrel. So all in, you're talking about $13 a barrel to get oil from Alberta to pick a market, be it Rotterdam, Philadelphia, St. John, Newfoundland, to access higher priced markets. Because, and of course, sometimes while, you know, Brent and WTI may be about the same, we could end up with gluts of oil in Western Canada where we see our pricing go to $0. And in fact, actually literally negative. We've seen it happen a couple of times in the past 3 years. So obviously diversifying our distribution and customers is important, not just to the energy industry, but to the employees that work in the business, to the people who, well, to the government, the social services that we pay for, or that our government has to pay for, our provincial budget, which of course, as we all know, is about $18 billion in deficit this year. It's just across the board. So how important this is. So there's numbers on the bottom here, just some very high-level illustrative, simple economics. This isn't built out with massive spreadsheets and a whole bit, but it's just for illustration purposes. And then when you actually look at, okay, so if we're talking about shipping oil out through the Hudson Bay, isn't that going to create huge amount of volume increases. Well, let's be realistic. 120,000 barrels a day by rail, it's basically one train. It's two trains if you take it right to Churchill. It is one Handymax tanker, which can be shipped right from the Churchill today every second day, about 180 a year. So sure, we double up the size of the number of tankers or ships that go in and out of Churchill. But if you compare, Montreal does over 2,000 ships a year that come in and out of the St. Lawrence and has all of the same environmental concerns and issues, excluding polar bears, of course, but the same issues as what Churchill would have. So is this done anywhere else? Absolutely it is. So this is a map of from looking at basically the North Pole, and you can see all of that yellow are all of the ships that are running around the north coast of Russia and Norway, and what's can't quite see there, but in the Gulf of Bothnia, which is part of the Baltic Sea, the northern part of the Baltic Sea by Finland, and they all go through the ice. They all operate year round, and it's done today. So there's no reason why we can't do this in Canada today for energy. And in fact, we do it today for bulk shipping. And I'll get to that in my last closing video in a moment here that shows that. So these are actually pictures of operating facilities today in the world, in the Arctic, off the north coast of Russia, in the Gulf of Bothnia, and in Canada. So the top two pictures are offshore loading terminals. Similar operations could be put in the Hudson Bay, where an oil tanker would pull up, it would hook onto a hose, and you've got icebreaker support here, but many of these ships now don't even need icebreaker support. There's lots of ships going around the north coast of Russia and Norway that do not have icebreaker support because they have sufficient icebreaking capacity on their own. But you can see what's happening here today. There's been no accidents or spills or anything like that because these ships must be very well designed. The icebreaking ship on the bottom left, that's in the Gulf of Bothnia, just offshore Finland, because they service a refinery in Finland that has to go through ice all the time. And just for a little bit of perspective, the Hudson Bay only does get 1.5 meters of ice thickness at most, and it's seasonal ice, so it's very soft, and these ships can go through that quite easily. The ship on the bottom right is the Nunavik, which is owned by a Canadian company called Fednav, and Fednav actually has operated in the Arctic for decades, actually, and they service northern mines like Baffin Island and northern Quebec, nickel, and they've even gone so far as to have shipped a shipment of nickel from northern Quebec through the frozen ice all the way through the Northwest Passage to China. So it is definitely doable. We have already done it. And I think my last slide is a short little 2.5-minute video that talks about Fednav and their history. But I know, leave it there. If anyone has questions after this video, I am absolutely welcome to them, or send me an email after this if you want. But I think the key message about this, my little piece of this presentation here, is it's definitely doable. It is far less cost intensive to build a short little piece of rail line out to, say, Port Nelson, or to even fix up some of the railway that goes to Churchill. And we could be shipping literally hundreds of thousands of barrels a day out through the Hudson Bay on a year-round basis with specialized tankers, such as this one as you see on your screen, to global markets. And it would be a fraction of the cost of fighting to build multi-billion-dollar pipelines through jurisdictions where the politicians are just fighting you each and every step of the way. This can be done led by First Nations, with them getting massive benefits from employment and tax revenues in the region, and tremendously beneficial to the provinces that are that will benefit, in particular Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, but also to Canada more generally by the increased realized prices that every company along the value chain will receive and pay taxes for and generate employment from. And in particular, as we look at our government deficits today, this is the kind of thing that can help to turn our fiscal situation around, both federally and provincially. We just need a little bit of political will to make it happen. And so with that, I'll just turn on this video and look forward to any questions if there's any time. Thank you.
The Arctic. A vast and remote expanse with one of the harshest climates on the planet. Marine transportation is the only viable means to bring supply and support to such extreme polar regions. Yet, few transporters can brave the elements, particularly in the long and bitter months of winter. Fednav has been a world leader in Arctic shipping for 60 years, developing innovative transportation solutions tailored to overcome the challenges posed by glacial environments. Historically, marine traffic in the Arctic was dictated by the ebb and flow of sea ice. But today, Fednav's MV Arctic, Umiak 1 and Nunavik, the most powerful ice-breaking bulk carriers in the world, operate unescorted year-round, delivering essential supplies to polar mines and hauling back valuable mineral concentrates. In 2014, one of these ships, the Nunavik, became the first vessel to complete a commercial cargo voyage without escort through the Northwest Passage, navigating from northern Quebec to China. Fednav's continuing investments in vessels and technology, along with unparalleled shipboard and onshore expertise, are the foundation on which we have built our world-leading reputation, with a firm commitment to safety, self-sufficiency, and sustainability. The development of IceNav, an advanced navigation support system that incorporates a reliable ice detection radar and provides data crucial to navigating in polar waters, and pioneering the use of aerial drones for ice reconnaissance, are prime examples of Fednav's commitment to advancing ice navigation expertise and technology. From the infant stages of new mining developments, we work hand in hand with our clients, applying the full spectrum of our team's expertise in naval architecture and extensive knowledge of sea ice to assure the success of Arctic ventures. Looking forward, Fednav will continue to lead the way in polar bulk shipping, providing total transportation solutions to North America's northern mines. And through our ongoing collaboration with resource developers, regulators, academics, researchers, local communities, and environmental groups, we are dedicated to delivering an increasingly higher standard of sustainable shipping for years to come. Fednav, delivering a higher standard for over 70 years.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jeff. We are up against the clock here, but if anybody does have further questions, wants to talk to Jeff, you can send an email to info@suitsandboots.ca. And I really appreciate that presentation. The most common question people had, though, is kind of the same. It still has to pass other provinces. We still have some challenges with our federal government approvals, and we know there's going to be opposition to it because there are people who will oppose everything. But all the same, let's give them as many projects as possible and as proposals as possible to try and oppose, so they can't sit and focus on one at a time and pick them off.
Yeah, if I may, just quickly to that very question. So the Nistanan is a First Nations-led group that has the local bands on board with their plans. And secondly, we're talking about crude by rail, where you do not need the cross-provincial requirements to actually go and build. If it was a pipeline, absolutely, but not for rail. The real question is how to get from onshore to offshore, that little short connector pipe. That's the biggest question. But then when you've got a group that's led by the First Nations with the technology that's already used in the rest of Canada, including at the Irving refinery, that's pretty hard to stop. And it's the same thing if you're just offloading oil from crude rail cars at the port of Churchill. They own the port authority, they own the port. You got a marine tank farm that's there already, and they've got the railroad. So it's not viable the way it is. So it means more volumes going through there. I wish them nothing but the best of luck and hope for their success to get more volumes. And in fact, actually, when I've been there, it's hard to maybe see, but that's actually the Port of Churchill mug that the manager of the port gave me. And I'll say I'm wearing my Lazy Bear Lodge hoodie today. A little shout out to Wally Dudrick up there in Churchill. And I would just say that whether you visit Churchill in the winter or the summer, wear a hoodie, because in the winter you need it for the cold, and in the summer you need it to protect yourself from mosquitoes. So thanks everyone. I look forward to any questions you send.